Hi everyone, and thank you for taking the time to check out this video. Today I'm going to be discussing some of the obvious similarities and less obvious differences between two of my favorite historic military sidearms. The PM pistol, commonly referred to as the Makarov, and the Polish P-83 Wanad. If you look at these two guns on paper, they're essentially identical. Both pistols operate on a Walther PP-inspired fixed-barrel straight blowback action. Both pistols have a slide-mounted decocking safety, double-action, single-action triggers, and single-stack magazines with an 8+1 round capacity in the chambering of 9x18mm Makarov. It is worth noting that the Makarov cartridge gets its name from the Soviet weapons designer Makarov, which is the same designer who designed this pistol. That information out of the way, let's take a look at the similarities between these magazines, and in the process begin to verify these weapons are unloaded. If we look at these if we look at these magazines side by side, we can see the similarities. It's very clear that the P-83 Polish designers used the makarov-pm magazine as a template. So much so that I have heard reports that you can modify one of these magazines to work in the other gun. I can't personally confirm that, but just looking at it, it does seem plausible. Now that we have verified these magazines are empty, let's go ahead and confirm that the chambers are empty as well. You cannot see that. I can. That is an empty chamber. That is also an empty chamber. Moving right up from the magazines, let's go ahead and look at the magazine releases. I'm sure many of you are aware that both of these have the old style European heel magazine release. The PM magazine release has this tensioned, knurled knob that you actually have to push down and pull back. It requires a little bit of dexterity, not much. It's anyone who's used this pistol more than a single time will probably tell you it's not as good as the modern thumb release. However, it's perfectly serviceable. You push with your thumb, strip with your weak index finger, and it's quite functional. The P-83 improves on this quite significantly, in my opinion. Instead of requiring a spring tension knob, which requires some dexterity, it's just a button. Is it as good as having the button here? Probably not, no. However, it's definitely an improvement on the PM pistol, and that button is definitely something which sets it apart from its predecessor, the PM. Moving up from the magazine release, let's take a look at the grips. Obviously, the PM pistol has these iconic Red Star grips. That's one of the things that makes this gun such a beautiful collector piece and a absolutely crucial part of any Cold War historic collection. What might be less obvious than the aesthetics is the fact that these grips are notably thinner. I'm not sure how much that comes off on camera. However, the PM grips are distinctly thinner than the black plastic two-piece P-83 grips. What's the significance of that? Well, if you were to ever conceal carry one of these firearms, I would recommend the PM pistol, on the grounds that the grips are thinner and it is easier to conceal. I would also say that because of the hammer is much more snag resistant. We'll get to the hammer in a bit. The other significance of that is for pretty much any purpose other than concealed carry, I prefer to shoot the P-83. That added width creates added surface area for your palm. That's added surface area to distribute the recoil forces, and that does make the P-83 a more pleasant, comfortable, controllable gun to shoot. Alright, moving up from the grips, we'll go right to that hammer, which I just alluded to. The hammers on both of these pistols, as you can see, are quite different. The PM has this quite conventional hammer. It's really quite, despite being rather small, it's really quite nice. The serrations make it very easy to get purchase on. However, it's pretty hard to compete with a big old swooping hammer like this. That P-83 hammer, I've never seen a hammer like it, to be honest with you. And I don't think this is a big deal on a pistol like this, double action, single action pistol with a decocker. I can't think of a scenario in which I actually use the hammer. However, if I ever had to, I would prefer to use that big old swoop. Unless, of course, as earlier stated, I'm drawing from concealment. This is begging to get hooked on a t-shirt, a belt, a sweatshirt, whereas this is going to be much more resistant to that phenomenon. Alright, moving up from the hammers, let's go ahead and look at the sights. This is going to be one area where the pistols are essentially identical. I call these the Milsurp magnifying glass sights because you might need a magnifying glass to find them. They're right here. They're real small. But all jokes aside, these sights do work. Obviously, they're not excess big dots. However, assuming you have good eyesight, they will get the job done. They are dead on my pistols and every pistol of this category which I've fired. And due to the fixed barrel design of both of these pistols, they have excellent inherent accuracy, and these sights will allow you to really stack them in there if you do your part. That's a pretty cool thing which separates these guns from modern Browning locking action pistols, which of course for, say, combat or self-defense uses, it's really not a big deal. Typically, if you can hit a dinner plate at 15 yards with a handgun, that will be good enough to defend yourself. However, if you enjoy precision pistol shooting, it's surprisingly impressive what pistols such as these two can do. Alright, moving from the hammers, let's go ahead and look at the safety / decockers on both of these guns. This is a category where the PM has, in my opinion, a much better safety. The safety on the PM has far more surface area here, which creates for a much more user-friendly disengaging. As long as you do your part, you get your thumb right up on the slide, and you get strong downward force, it will disengage every time. It's not so easy that you can do it without thinking. I happen to have offhand, it's no Beretta 80 series safety. This safety, by the way, is an absolute dream. However, this is a perfectly user-friendly safety, and I love that about it. The P-83 safety, on the other hand, is a nightmare. I absolutely hate it. You can, if you heard that click, that was actually the slide stop that I brushed into. You can do your part all day long. That is not disengaging. At least with my size hands, I have, I would say, average male size hands. Definitely not big old claws. I don't have tiny little mitts either. In order for me to disengage the safety with my thumb, I have to deliberately hook the flesh of my thumb under this little knob and push down. That is something I would absolutely never trust myself to do in a high-stress parasympathetic nervous system activation state. If I was to ever want to carry this gun in a safe condition, I would always use an empty chamber as a safety. I would much rather rack the slide and lose one round capacity than try to finagle with this little abomination of a safety. Now that I'm done ripping on the safety, there is a plus to this safety, and that is you can work the slide with the safety on. Is that a big deal? No. It's pretty cool, though, because most pistols I've ever handled, including the PM, do not allow you to operate the slide on a safe gun. If you saw that hammer drop there, that is it's kind of interesting to watch. You see the hammer locks back right until you go into battery, and that is a safe hammer drop because essentially it's just decocking the gun as soon as it goes into battery. Although, of course, if you're not expecting that, that can be a little disconcerting the first time you do it on a live round. This does make it kind of cool, however, if you were to carry this gun with a loaded chamber. It does allow for something which I think is kind of neat, which is to be able to clear that chamber with the safety on. Obviously, that's not a feature that you should ever be depending on. However, it is kind of nice, and it does remove a little bit of stress, perhaps, of, say, unloading your firearm in your home. Moving on from the safety, we'll briefly just touch on the fact that this is a loaded chamber indicator on the P-83. The PM has no such feature. Big deal, not in my book, but it could be to you. Alright, moving forward from the safety, let's go ahead and look at the triggers on these. The P-83 trigger, first of all, hopefully you can get that in the light, that interesting green. This is a old school anodized green aluminum trigger. And the fact this is an aluminum trigger is going to segue into how I'm going to end this video, which is around build construction. This is a cost-efficient gun. This is a stamped sheet metal gun, and I'll go into that in a second, but part of the cost savings in this gun is that old school anodized aluminum trigger. What does that mean in terms of function of the gun? Absolutely nothing. The P-83, in my opinion, has a vastly superior trigger to the PM. And I am referring to the double action trigger. I believe that the single action trigger on both of these guns is essentially identical. Remember, these are safe weapons. Single action trigger, absolutely unremarkable. I have no complaints, and I'm definitely not going to go ahead and brag about what a great single action trigger that is. Single action trigger on the P-83, it's about the same. Really nothing to write home about. They're both perfectly functional. No, they're not crisp. They're not a high power. They're not a single action only trigger. However, they're definitely, in my opinion, superior to, say, your average striker action little mushy break. The double action trigger is where the P-83 really jumps ahead. Makarov double action trigger, it's absolutely not bad at all, but there's a little bit of heaviness right at the end of the trigger, and in my experience, that does not help my double action shooting. The P-83 double action trigger is delightful. It's so smooth, it's heavy in the middle, but it lightens as it ends. It's actually a slightly heavier trigger, but that does create a really crisp break in the end, and if you do your part, this is just a really great double action trigger to shoot. And again, like the grips, one of the reasons why ultimately I prefer to shoot the P-83. I think the PM is a more beautiful pistol. I think it's a more valued part of my gun collection. However, for example, if I was to hear gunshots outside of my home right now, I would throw a loaded magazine in the P-83, and I would leave the PM where it sits. And the reason for that is, while they're both phenomenal pistols, when push comes to shove, the P-83 is the one I'd rather have in my hand. Moving forward from the triggers, let's look at the way they take down. I'm not going to fully take them down. However, there's just an interesting difference between the two. The PM has this kind of traditional Walther. The whole trigger guard itself comes down. I think Walthers actually lock down on their own. The PM, you twist to the side and just rest it right on the frame. The P-83 has this interesting kind of falling block design. It's kind of cool. I believe the first time I've seen this is on, say, I believe it's a Sauer 38H. I'm not 100% sure about that, so maybe correct me below. However, it's kind of cool. That just allows you to, once those blocks are down on both pistols, you just pull the slide back, lift up, and bring it forward. I assume most of you are familiar with that process, and if you're not, there are excellent videos on that process. So those are the takedown features, and the last thing to really talk about in terms of differences between these firearms is the way that they're built. There's massive differences in the quality of construction between these two firearms. The PM pistol is, in my opinion, it's a work of art. It's a beautifully milled firearm with high polish bluing. It is it's a phenomenal gun, and it has some beautiful aesthetic features. It's got this browning on the hammer and on the safety, which I believe, again, maybe someone can correct me below, I believe this has to do something with the heat treating process on these particular parts. Makes the bluing change color. That's the version I've heard. Perhaps someone watching this video knows better than I, though, and I encourage you and humbly request that you educate me. In any case, it creates a really aesthetic and collectible package. The P-83, on the other hand, by comparison, is a piece of junk. The P-83 was designed as a cost-saving replacement to, a quick cameo, the P-64, the earlier Polish pistol, which is built to a similar standard of manufacture as the PM pistol. This is a beautifully machined pistol. I always like to point out that just absolutely gorgeous tiny little rear sight that they took the time to dovetail in. And then they realized that it's really not necessary, so they went with the P-83, which is a more cost-efficient gun. And the P-83, it is fascinating because it is welded, it is brazed. Let's go ahead and check out some of these features here. I'm gonna get some focus here. There we go. So if you can see that seam in the rear of the slide there, what you're actually looking at is the fact that the slide itself is a folded piece of sheet metal with the internals, with the bolt literally brazed in. We can actually see some of that brazing here. Pardon the dirt under my nails. You can just see these pretty crude joints in the metal here. We can also see a weld under the trigger guard there. That trigger guard is just a piece of folded steel, as opposed to that beautiful milled trigger guard. And the full body, it's all stamped steel. It's cheaply manufactured, but in the end, that's really aesthetics, because both of these firearms are 100% reliable. I would never hesitate to trust my life to either of these firearms. As you saw earlier, they shoot this Russian steel-cased ammunition, and I've shot thousands of rounds through both pistols and never had any malfunction, any hang-up of any kind. So this is one of those rare situations where quality of manufacture doesn't translate to enhanced performance. So that's how I'm going to end this video, just summarizing the kind of differences. Oh, and actually, I'll just jump back. One of the great ways to view the difference in quality of manufacture is the rear serrations. You see those beautifully milled serrations, and then you see they just scored that sheet metal. It's preposterous. However, it doesn't translate to a better or worse gun. So in terms of recommendations for these guns, if you're to get one of these guns for concealed carry, PM all the way. That's because of the hammer. It's because of the thin grips. If you're to get one of these guns as a centerpiece of your Cold War collection, or as just a random component of your Cold War collection, PM all the way. It's better to look at. It's more impressive, and it's just generally it played a big role in history. The PMs were all over the Soviet communist world, where the P-83s were limited to Poland. Of course, if you're Polish, you're going to get your Cold War collection, P-83 all the way, but I don't need to tell you that. Now, if you're getting a gun for training, for home defense, for a glove box gun, P-83 is my recommendation. The reason for that is the wider grips and the better double-action trigger. As I said, at the end of the day, if I'm going to have a gun in my collection, it's going to be the Makarov. If I'm going to have a gun concealed in my waistband, it's going to be the Makarov. If I'm going to have a gun in my hand for any purpose, as a tool, as a self-protection, if the gun is already in my hand, this is the gun I want. Alright, that's my video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you got any questions, feel free to shoot them below. And thanks so much for your time again. Have a great one.